Hi, my name is Riley Donahoe. I'm doing my U.S. foreign policy brief on China and Taiwan. More specifically, what the U.S. role should be if China were to invade Taiwan militarily. Background on the relationship between China and Taiwan. Since the late 1920s, the Chinese Communist Party had been engaged in hostilities with the Republic of China. These hostilities ceased for a short period of time during World War II because they needed to focus on defeating Japan, who was occupying parts of China at the time. Once Japan was defeated in 1945, hostilities between the two parties resumed. It ended in 1949 with the defeat of the Republic of China, led by Shanghai Shek, by the communist forces led by Mao Zedong. The Republic of China forces fled to the island of Taiwan, where the government established itself in Taipei, and other loyal followers of the Republic of China also fled to the island. And the Chinese Communist Party established itself as the ruling party of mainland China. After the Republic of China fled to Taiwan in 1949, the United States recognized that as the legitimate government of China. It did not recognize the Chinese Communist Party as being the legitimate government. That was until 1979, when the U.S. officially recognized the Chinese Communist Party as the leader of the People's Republic of China. Um, with that came the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, which basically authorizes de facto diplomatic relations with the governing Taiwanese authorities. It provided the U.S. to treat Taiwan the same as other sovereign nations while not recognizing its independence. The act does not guarantee that the U.S. would intervene militarily if the PRC were to attack Taiwan, but it does provide that the U.S. can provide Taiwan with means of defense, so it can provide it with weapons, ammunition, any sort of defensive aid that it needs. The policy that the U.S. has been operating under since then has been known as strategic ambiguity. This is meant to dissuade Taiwan from declaring independence, but simultaneously dissuade the PRC from unifying with Taiwan using military force. So, since the current president of China, Xi Jinping, took power in 2012, he has taken a more aggressive stance on reunifying with Taiwan. He consistently uses the threat of military force as an option to reunify with Taiwan. It should be noted that Taiwan is currently a thriving democracy with a strong free market economy. The PRC has rapidly been militarizing islands in the South China Sea. They've been building up their military. As you can see, the chart on the right of the slide there, the 9 dash line is what China claims as its sovereign territory, and all the islands within that 9 dash line China claims as their territory. But as you can see, the little circles are the island chains within the South China Sea, and the other countries highlighted also claim islands within those island chains and within the South China Sea as their sovereign territory. So there's a lot of disputes between China's territorial claims and the claims of other nations in the region. So perhaps the most important question is, how does this affect the United States? Taiwan and the U.S. have deep economic, financial, and trade relationships. They're actually our eighth largest trading partner in the world, and the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea are very vital waterways to global shipping and global trade. It also gives us access to our allies in the region, like Japan and the Philippines. If the PRC were to annex Taiwan, it could cut the U.S. off from these important allies. It could also disrupt global trade and help them establish military dominance in the region. So, a loss of Taiwan would also cause U.S. allies to question our leadership in the world. It could make them more amenable to working with the PRC over the United States. And it's also important to note that Taiwan manufactures approximately 70% of global semiconductors and nearly 90% of advanced chips for the global economy. And we have no short-term recourse to rectify this loss if China were to take over Taiwan. So that would have devastating impacts on our economy, and then it could cause domestic instability within the United States. Three main approaches that the United States could take to dealing with this issue. There's the diplomatic, the economic, and military approaches. The diplomatic approach has been used for decades now, and seemingly since Xi Jinping came to power, it hasn't been working too well because he's so adamant about reunification with Taiwan, using whatever means necessary. This doesn't mean we should cease to use diplomacy. We should continue to use diplomacy and communicate with our Chinese counterparts and reiterate to them the importance of maintaining the status quo and peace and stability in the region. The economic approach, we've used this since the Trump administration by sanctioning China for their violations of international law and their coercive economic practices. This should always remain a viable option to deal with China. I think it's a good middle ground between diplomacy and military approaches. So this should be a viable option left on the table should China continue with their aggressive and coercive actions. The last approach, military, is last for a reason. It should always be a last resort, but the U.S. should maintain a military presence in the region. The Navy should continue to conduct freedom of navigation operations, which enables free trade and global shipping to continue through the South China Sea and also challenges China's claims within the region. We should maintain our strategic ambiguity standpoint regarding Taiwan's defense to dissuade the PRC from acting upon using military force. Question becomes, what if China invades Taiwan? What should the U.S. do then? As you can see, the chart on the right displays U.S. military power versus China's military power, and we beat them in some significant areas such as aircraft and naval vessels. They beat us in overall military personnel, artillery, armored vehicles, things like that. Should be important to note that while they beat us in some of those areas, their equipment and technology is inferior to ours. And it's also hard to gauge how China's military would perform uh, since they have not been engaged in a military conflict for so long. It's kind of hard to predict how well their military would perform. But given the strategic and economic importance of Taiwan, the U.S. should engage in at least limited military operations should China invade Taiwan. What I mean by this is we could send our Navy over into the region if China were to invade and set up a naval blockade. It would be important for us to reopen trade routes because it would quickly disrupt the global economy should China blockade the Taiwan Strait and parts of the South China Sea. That would have devastating impacts around the globe. So it would be important to get that trade route back open. So we should utilize our Navy to do that. Also, we should continue to provide Taiwan with means to defend itself. Um, Short of sending troops in on the ground to face Chinese troops, I think these are our best options. But it should be noted that because this is such an important region, because this is strategically so important, that option should not be taken off the table. And ultimately, if the U.S. were to fail to use its military, fail to act if China were to invade Taiwan, like I stated previously, because we rely on Taiwan, especially for chips and semiconductors, um, this would lead to widespread uh, economic recessions in many countries. It would have domestic implications, domestic unrest because of inflation and people not being able to afford things. So I think it's important to express to the American people the importance of why we should be involved and why potentially our military could be involved in a conflict with China over Taiwan. I think it just needs to be reiterated how important Taiwan is to the global economy and our national security interests.